Welcome everyone, this is Chad for Solamo and welcome back to this video lesson.
And today we're going to discuss Chapter 5, Unit 3, Developments and Achievements, and you can check them on your book on pages 147 to 151. And at the end of this lesson, you will be able to distinguish the meaning of humanism in the Renaissance period compared to its meaning today, identify 3 well-known artists during the Renaissance period and recognize their famous work of art, and lastly, recognize Nicholas Copernicus' contribution to the world. Let's have a short review before we start with our lesson. Okay, let's start. Government of Florence. So in 1450, Florence was ruled by 21 merchant guilds, and only guild members were allowed to take part in government, and they had to be approved by a special group of officials called the Accoppiatori. And a council or signoria of 9 men, also chosen by the Accoppiatori, served for only 2 months to run the city. But that was changed in 1480. The Medici family ruled the city by controlling the Accoppiatori. Okay, next, society. So, this was the new classes of people during the Renaissance Italy. So first we have the nobles. They owned much of the land, so they're wealthy landowners. And merchants, people who made their money from trade and banking. And the middle class, those were the skilled workers and professionals. Okay, and the lower middle class, they were unskilled workers who had few rights. And lastly, the slaves, or they usually worked in houses as servants. Next. Now let's have Savonarola's revolt. So who's Savonarola again? He was a monk or a priest who came to Florence in 1489. He preached that people had turned away from God and that politics and art had become pagan, evil, and corrupt. People of Florence would be punished if they did not change their way. So he burned books and artworks and held his biggest public burning called the Bonfire of the Vanities in 1497. Savonarola, who had already made enemies of the Pope and other powerful political leaders in Italy, soon lost his popularity among the people. And in May 1497, riots broke out and Savonarola was arrested and tried by the Pope for heresy. And after 3 weeks of torture, Savonarola and the 2 of his supporters were burned at the stake in the same place where he held the Bonfire of the Vanities. In the previous lesson, we already discussed what Renaissance was, and this time we're going to study the developments and achievements of the Renaissance period. Okay. As we already discussed, Renaissance began in Florence, Italy, so it's considered the home of the Renaissance. But why? It's because of the wealthy merchants and banking families such as the Medici. They supported or became patrons of artists, writers, and scholars during that time, most especially Cosimo de' Medici. He founded 3 libraries in Florence. And he was interested in the ideas of ancient Greece and Rome and paid people to translate Greek's works into Latin. And he also encouraged people to study philosophy and spread new ideas, particularly humanism. And in 1444, Cosimo de' Medici founded the first public library in Florence at San Marco, which was central importance to the humanist movement in Florence during the Renaissance. Okay. What is humanism? To understand this better, let's compare the ideas during the Middle Ages and the Renaissance period. So in the Middle Ages, as you can see, there's the hierarchy, and on top of that was the Pope or the Church. And why was the Church on top? Because in the Middle Ages, people believe that God was directly involved in every part of life. And they just had to obey God's will and accept the teaching of the Church without any question. But during the Renaissance period, people started to believe that humans should be proud of their achievements and be curious about all the life around them. So this new way of thinking was called humanism. In Renaissance, humanism meant the study of classical or the ancient Greek and Roman ideas. And a person who studied the classics, the writings from the ancient Greece and Rome, was called a humanist. Okay, humanists believed that it was important to study human values. And they believed that people had the freedom and responsibility to make up their own minds because they had reasons. Okay, now let's compare the meaning of humanism during the Renaissance period and today at present. So during the Renaissance period, humanism was the study of classical, the ancient Greeks, and Roman ideas. And today, the definition of humanism is a belief that human needs and values, or the needs and desires of humans, are more important than religious beliefs. So people now are looking to science instead of religious teachings in order to understand the world. Now, let's move on to Renaissance art and science. So the artists of the Renaissance created a new age where many of the most famous works of art in all of history were created. So let's say, for example, Pieta, that's a famous sculpture of Michelangelo, of Virgin Mary and Jesus Christ. And also we have Mona Lisa, we have the Last Supper, and others. Okay, so during this time, art became more realistic, and Renaissance artists used perspective. When we say perspective, that's ways of drawing and painting that made their works look more three-dimensional. Artists use perspective to represent three-dimensional or 3D objects on a two-dimensional surface, which is a piece of paper or canvas, and in a way that looks natural and realistic. So perspective can create an illusion of space and depth on a flat surface or the picture plane, just like you can see in the picture. The most well-known artists of the Renaissance were Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Botticelli. Okay, now let's start with Leonardo da Vinci. So he began his painting career in Florence, and his painting, Mona Lisa, as you can see in the picture, was the most famous portrait in the world. And Leonardo da Vinci was interested in many different subjects and was a scientist and an inventor. His notebooks had records of his studies and ideas, which included detailed study of human anatomy, mechanics, and architecture, sketches for painting, and inventions. So let's have the first source, 3C. So that was Leonardo da Vinci's drawing of Vitruvian Man, which explored the relationship between human proportions and geometry, which was first described by the Roman architect Vitruvius in 15 BCE. Okay, now let's have some examples of Leonardo da Vinci's sketches. Okay, so let's have the first source 3A. So this one was a sketch of flying machine based on the structure of a bat's wings. Okay, the next one we have, that's Leonardo da Vinci's water lifting devices. And also here, this is another design of a flying machine. And the other one was an aerial screw, suggestive of a helicopter from the Codex Atlanticus. Next, this is also another work of art of Leonardo da Vinci, The Last Supper. Okay, it is the most copied religious painting ever. It is located in the convent of Santa Maria del Grassi in Milan, Italy. And also the other one, this is a pencil sketch by Leonardo da Vinci. Now let's move on to our next artist, Michelangelo. Michelangelo studied and worked in Florence. He was sculptor, painter, and architect. And under the patronage of Lorenzo de' Medici, he created some of the most famous works of art in the world, including his statue of David, which was originally made to stand as symbol of Florence outside the Palazzo Vecchio. Well, if you can still remember, that's a place where members of guilds meet to discuss matters about Florence. And another important work of art by Michelangelo. So, this one, Michelangelo painted the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, and the work took approximately 4 years to complete. And we have the last but not the least, Sandro Botticelli. He was a favorite painter of the Medici family. He painted subjects from Roman and Greek stories and myths, such as Goddess Venus and the Three Graces. His most famous paintings were the Birth of Venus and Primavera, which were created for the house of the members of the Medici family. Okay, now let's proceed to our next important or significant individual during the Renaissance. So this time it's not for arts but in science. So that's Nicholas Copernicus. He was born in Poland and he was a lawyer, doctor, translator, artist, and economist. He made the model of our solar system, which is the sun in the center of the solar system. And it's an important scientific development in Europe during that time. But unfortunately, after his death, his theory was criticized by the church, and his original books were made illegal until 1835. Okay, so we're done with our discussion. Now let's move on to our activity. Let's have the first one. Okay, so in this activity, you are going to identify the word being described in each sentence. You have 1 minute to do this, and your time starts now. Okay, now let's check your answers. For number 1, he founded 3 libraries or 3 public libraries in Florence, including the first one. What's the correct answer? That's Cosimo de' Medici. Okay, next, number 2. A person who studied ancient Greeks and Romans writings. That's the humanist. And today, it means a focus on human concerns and values. It's humanism. Okay, and number 4, it's ways of drawing and paintings that made their works look more three-dimensional or 3D. That's what we call perspective. He was interested in many different subjects and was a scientist and an inventor. So that's Leonardo da Vinci. Okay, for number 6, Under the patronage of Lorenzo de' Medici, he created some of the most famous works of art in the world, including his statue of David. That's Michelangelo. And for number 7, he was a favorite painter of the Medici family. He created Primavera in Birth of Venus. Okay? The correct answer is Sandro Botticelli. And for the last one, he drew the sun in the center of the solar system. That's Nicholas Copernicus. Great job! Okay, now let's move on to our second activity. This time it's very easy. You just need to identify the name of its picture. Okay? You have 30 seconds to do this, and your time starts now. Okay, now let's check your answer. For number 1, that's Leonardo da Vinci's sketch of flying machine based on the structure of a bat's wings. Second, The Last Supper. Okay, you can see there Jesus and his 12 disciples. And the next one, the third one, that's Leonardo da Vinci's drawing of Vitruvian Man. And, of course, the most famous work of art, Mona Lisa. Great job! Okay, now let's continue. This time, I want you to match the name to the correct picture. Okay, you still have 30 seconds. Okay, let's check. Okay, so the first one, that's Botticelli's painting, The Birth of Venus. Okay, and the next one, that's what we call Primavera. Okay, and the third one, that's the model of solar system developed by Nicholas Copernicus. And we have Statue of David and La Piera. That's Michelangelo's work. Okay, now let's move on to the summary of our lesson. And this time we're going to do this together. So let's start. Okay, Florence was considered the home of the Renaissance. Wealthy merchants and banking families supported artists, writers, and scholars. Cosimo de' Medici, who was interested in the ideas of ancient Greece and Rome, founded 3 libraries in Florence, and he encouraged people to study philosophy and spread new ideas, particularly or specifically humanism. Okay, what is humanism? In Renaissance, humanism was the study of classical or ancient Greek and Roman ideas, and a person who studied the classics, the writings of the ancient Greece and Rome, was called a humanist. And today, humanism means a focus on human concerns and values. Okay, next, Renaissance art and science. So the artists of Renaissance created a new age where many of the famous works of art in all of history were created. So Renaissance artists used perspective, its ways of drawing, and painting that made their works look more three-dimensional or 3D. And the most well-known artists of the Renaissance were Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Sandro Botticelli. And Leonardo da Vinci began his painting career in Florence. His painting, Mona Lisa, was the most famous portrait. And he was interested in many different subjects and was a scientist and an inventor. And Sandro Botticelli was a favorite painter of the Medici family. He painted subjects from Roman and Greek, stories and myths, and his most famous paintings were The Birth of Venus and Primavera, which were created for the house of members of the Medici family. And now let's have Michelangelo. He was an Italian sculptor, painter, architect, and also a poet. So under the support or patronage of Lorenzo de' Medici, he created some of the most famous works of art in the world, including his statue of David. So that's all for today. Good job! Now for self-assessment section, I want you to evaluate yourself by putting a tick on the boxes you think you can do and cross it out if you still have questions. Now do it!
Bye everyone! Thank you for watching. Keep safe and see you next time!